folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, Eclectic Club Reviews, and General Musical Meanderings. This week I'm going to take a look at Kung Fu, That's What I Like by 10 Hands. Now, if you are a music fan from the DFW area, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, in the late 80s and early 90s, this could probably be a kind of an exciting video for you because 10 Hands was a band that had a lot of prominence in that area locally. They unfortunately never quite transcended out and became visible broadly, but in some ways this is what made them so special. Kung Fu, That's What I Like was released in 1988, late 1988. And 10 Hands had a lifespan of about a good 10 years throughout that time, and lots of lineup changes. But this particular one, on this recording, this first recording of them, of Paul Slavens, Gary Muller Jr., Steve Brand, Earl Harvin, and Mike Dillon. These musicians laid the groundwork for what would become a really enduring legacy group in that area during that time. Now, I'm very fortunate tonight to have lead singer and primary songwriter and keyboardist Paul Slavens on call in an interview to talk about this album and what led into it, maybe give us some insights on this, what I feel is a pretty classic recording. Now, usually for my interviews, I try to do video interviews and so you can see the interactions between me and the person that I'm talking to. But unfortunately, there was kind of a technical glitch this time around. I got no video footage of my discussion with Paul Slavens. And I kind of thought about going back and recapturing it, but we had such a natural conversation. We covered such ground that I felt like going back and redoing it would feel a little bit synthetic. So I went ahead and used it for this one. I had to apologize for the fact that I don't have my normal standards. But I hope that you'll find the conversation we had interesting and engaging, especially if you're a fan. And, you know, Paul, again, I'm really sorry that happened. But like you say, sometimes in your live shows, sometimes you get screwed. So without any further ado, Paul Slavens.
Love is the question.
As I look back at some of the videos and the old records of stuff that that are out there, you had a selection of what, eight tunes on that album, I think.
Yeah, not very many.
But you had a pretty big library of songs already kind of that you were playing live and preloaded.
Yeah, well, we did like the first year that we were together, we were playing a lot of my old songs that I had written in college before I moved to Texas. And we were playing, if they were like done songs, then they were my songs. And then the rest of it was just stuff that we were making up together, as a band. And so we had been playing for a little bit, but those were kind of, we could have done another 4 songs, and they might have ended up being some of the songs that we ended up playing later. But I don't know. We started cutting that record the week that Matt Chamberlain quit the band and joined the Bohemians, and Earl Harvin joined the band. And within 2 weeks, we were in the studio recording that album.
Wow.
So that's some of Earl's first playing with the band at all is on that record.
Yeah. It felt like Mikey and Earl kind of had a chemistry.
Oh yeah, well, and Mike and Matt and Earl, those three guys together, they had their own little brain trust for sure, and they were a unit, and they're still a unit.
Yeah.
Those guys they locked in together as a musical unit together in that band for sure. And they still do, like I said, they still do.
Recording the album, recording Kung Fu. What made you choose the songs that were on that album? I mean, if you had a backlog of 5 or 6 others,
Well, like I say, Earl had just joined the band. And so we probably were playing the songs that he felt the most comfortable about and that we decided to do with our manager.
Yeah. For me, it's a classic album.
Even
more so than I know the Big One Is Coming was kind of the one that got a lot of visibility, but for me, that was my introduction to the band. And even whenever you guys re-recorded some of those songs later, in my mind, the Kung Fu ones were the definitive ones.
Yeah, well, there was definitely we were on fire. Mm-hmm. We were full of youthful energy and ambition and faith in ourselves at that point.
Yeah.
Soon to be squashed out.
Yeah. diversity of the tunes on there, I think, is something that's kind of worth mentioning. You talked about Bad Stuff, and as I was listening to Bad Stuff again just today, like the bridge of that song still is like, it's a thing of beauty to me. It cracks me up because it's like, I often refer to Rush songs like they have what I call the instrumental excursion in the middle. It's not really a solo. It's kind of like a little mini 2112.
Yeah, it's a total prog rock thing.
Yeah.
The total prog rock thing. It's like, man, let's put some, and of course, it's a tone roll. And so the joke is that right in the middle of this thing, we bust out a tone roll in kind of Zappa style. Yeah.
A song that really had a lot of mileage, even to this day, was, you mentioned Old Eyes. Man, something about that tune. I talk a lot about nostalgia in general with music. And there's, of course, nostalgia built into your music now for all of us that were there at the time. But that was one of those songs that had like a sense of nostalgia to it, like instant nostalgia, almost.
Well, especially in 10 Hands. I was never prone to write songs about me or my feelings or things that happened to me or anything having to do with me really and personally. If any songs that are love songs, they're just love songs about fictional characters. Most of the songs are, like Little Man in Your Head or Confused, they're political commentary or something like that. And Old Eyes is one of the very few, and certainly in the early days, one of the very few songs that I wrote about something that mattered to me, that it was real and I was really thinking and talking about somebody. Yeah. And maybe that, and it was a very sad, very, very sad thing that happened. And so maybe that's what just come, that's why music is the way that it is, and that's why that's a singular song, because that was the one time when I just kind of, that kind of came out. I will also say that early on, that was one of the very first songs that I brought into 10 Hands. And Matt Chamberlain heard that song and he was like, that one, I like that. That's badass. And he wrote the drum groove to that and he really nailed what the groove needed to be, because he's the groove surgeon. That's what he was. He knows how to lay down. That's why he's famous. He can lay down the perfect groove, tasty. Yeah. And he nailed that thing. And that helped that song always be strong, because that groove never really changed. Earl was totally able to cop that groove and, made it with Mikey's.
Well, a piece of that song too that I like to point out is the guitar solo in that song. And probably to Steve's chagrin at this point, it's one of those things that it's such an integral part of the song. Like, if you change a note of that solo, you've lost something,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what Steve knows, because he plays that solo the same way he plays it as it is, which is a composed part of the song. Right. And we looked at we had songs in different ways. We handled songs as though they were just jams, and then other times they were not jams. You were playing exactly what you were supposed to play. They're more compositional in nature. And of course, when you're doing it live, it's loose, but it's not just playing whatever. It's not like a jam where I just play, it's G, and so you're jamming. It's kind of not like that in a lot of places. It's more, and so Steve especially liked to write out and have his solos. He put a lot of thought and work into crafting the tone of it and everything.
he always kind of, again, to make a Rush reference, he always kind of reminded me of like an Alex Lifeson type guy because very spontaneous and but also like knew when to craft something and use that part.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, and Adrian Belew, especially back in the 10 Hands days, he was really, you know, he was kind of doing some of the same stuff as Adrian was, where he wasn't really playing. A lot of times you hear 10 Hands stuff, and he's not really playing guitar, or you know, chords or anything. He's playing sounds and rhythmic stuff.
Yeah. I've been listening to King Crimson. You talk about Adrian Belew. I was a big fan of all that stuff walking in, and you know, back in the '80s, you really, if you wanted to know what a stick was. You know, that was not something that you just, you know, watched a video and like, oh, it's a stick. Like, I saw that Tony Levin played a stick on Discipline, and I was like, oh, I pictured like a wash tub bass or something, you know? Like, I didn't know what that was. And then I saw Gary play the stick, and I'm like, oh, I see.
That's what it is.
And that changed the way I listened to King Crimson. And now, I mean, I picked up a stick many years later and played as well, but like, seeing Gary do that was hugely influential to me.
Yeah, man. Well, you know, it's funny. Gary moved to Texas with Matt Chamberlain. They were friends in California, and they moved here together. Gary and I got together real early on because he and I hit it off real well, and started writing music and recording stuff and hanging out a lot. Right off the bat, me and Gary hit it off really well, and so I was always very excited about the stick for that same reason. You know, the whole Discipline, just like it's the coolest.
Yeah. And I remember at first I was like, well, how come he's just doing one-handed stuff? And I was all like,
that's hard enough.
That's plenty. That is plenty. I didn't figure that out until later.
Plenty.
And after I learned to play some, and I watched him, like, holy, he's just his smooth, like, ability to master.
You know, he always worked on his right hand, and still does, and does stuff like that. But you know, 10 Hands is already pretty busy and pretty as it is. And you know, the thing about the stick is it's a percussion instrument. It's not like, it doesn't have that soft, fleshy sound. It's got a ting tick 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 tick. So when he goes, you know, that's right in there with all the other stick stuff going, you know, other sticks. So, he decided early on that he needed to hold down the bass and concentrate on that.
But even so, like a lot of people who just play bass on stick play two-handed bass. I mean, Tony Levin even does that. But like, he's all just. And with that tuning, that fist tuning, the accuracy is super tough, and he's all over it. The greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse effect is one that actually if you notice what a stick is, it's, you know, he's playing stick on that. But that's the one he's really doing some sticky stuff. It sounds pretty sticky, you know. And you were doing some sampling on that tune as well, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. The Ensoniq Mirage.
Yeah.
The first commercially available sampler. Mm-hmm. I had one. I still have one.
Where did you get those samples from? I've always been curious about this.
Greenhouse Effect.
That's the and those.
Oh yeah, well, that is a sample of a young woman who was a veterinary technician that worked with my friend George, and she's saying "Onsun sai kamuntagun song." And what does that mean? I think it means a world with no money.
They think that they will be here till the end of time. Till the end of time. They think that they will be here until the end of time. Stickist Gary.
A new album coming out soon, Alphabet Girls Volume 2. Yeah. And Alphabet Girls Volume 1, again, for me, when that came out a few years ago, more than a few now, it's a brilliant, I know it's crazy that it was like, oh, that's the new album, and now I'm like, we're already on, time. But it's I'm really looking forward to, because I love the concept of the first album. I love the execution of the first album, and I love the variety. It shows all these facets of your musical personality. I mean, you go from like hardcore minimalism to like wacky jazz and all the stuff in between, and that's aspects of you. Mm-hmm. Do you kind of feel like that has been captured as well in the new record?
Well, to hear the first album described as you just did, I would say that, yeah, the second album has a lot of the same aspects to it. I don't think that there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think there's enough consistency and there's enough separation between the two. And I kind of like, at this point, I'm still kind of liking that. I'm not a huge fan of that first recording, and it would make me very happy to someday be able to spend the time and really record the first album again. The second album is head and shoulders above the first album in terms of just execution and the amount of time and production and just how happy I am with what happened. The first half has some great songs, some great music on it that I'm looking forward to playing with my Alphabet Girls Volume 2 band, going back and picking up a few of the things from the first album and incorporating them into this second half.
And what's the release date on
24
that currently?
June 24th.
Is that all formats electronically?
Well, we're not. There's such a backlog. It's so hard to get vinyl now and expensive to get vinyl that we're going to hold off on vinyl. It'll just come out on all the streaming platforms, and we'll have CDs. We made a limited run of 100 CDs for the album reveal party that was last weekend, and sold a bunch of those, but I'll hopefully have some to sell at the 10 Hands gig on June 3rd at the Kessler.
I watched the show just the other night, and I'm gonna say something was not right. How come people on television weird in the head? They won't show sex, but they show a lot of killing. Guess it must be better to show blood spittle than to let little junior see two naked people in bed. I got down, 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 down. You brought me down, down, down. So I got up and turned it off, and that left me alone with my thoughts and a great big thing right in the middle of my head. And I was confused.
So as you might have surmised, that even today, 10 Hands gets together on a pretty regular basis and does shows. And a lot of people come out and watch these shows. People of my generation who really connected with 10 Hands and love their music to this day and really feel like it's a part of us. And I will tell you that for me, Kung Fu, That's What I Like, really sits at the base of a new arc of my listening from back in the day, back in 1989, because up to that point I was a fan of, radio music. But 10 Hands opened my eyes to the possibilities of independent music and kind of the beautiful honesty that can be found in people who are not really beholden to record contracts and things like that. So to this day, my interest in independent music really can all the way be traced back to the influence of 10 Hands and specifically Kung Fu, That's What I Like. So you can find this album on Amazon. I highly suggest, if you're curious at all, you go back and check this out. And I also really highly suggest you check out Paul Slavens' new album, Alphabet Girls Volume 2. And if you like this video, there's going to be an accompanying video that's kind of the extended version of this interview, this discussion. We talk about lots of different things. The conversation wanders a little bit more organically. There's even more problems with that video, but I think the conversation is really interesting. And I'll be posting that soon for anybody who might be interested in checking that out. Next week, I'm going to be doing my top 12, mid-year top 12 this year. So please keep on the lookout for that one. And until you see you guys next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.